And welcome Martha, didn't get a chance to greet her coming in.
Wow.
So the meeting will come to order at 7:01 p.m. And this is the September 19th, 2023 meeting of the Town of Southampton Landmarks and Historic Districts Board. Present are members Stephanie Davis, William Hine, Martha Green, Jeff Gibbons, Susan Clark, and Tim Ganettis, and myself, Ed Wisnowski, and liaison from Land Management, David Wilcox. This meeting is being conducted under town and New York State law providing for in-person and remote participation. Individuals may undertake remote participation by activating the Zoom links on the town clerk's website. The published agenda as well has the link for tonight's meeting. Viewing only is found by activating the live link at the top of the town clerk's meeting portal page. The online Zoom participation is being moderated by CTV, Kevin of CTV. For comment on a particular agenda item, please notify CTV via the chat function so that comment can be made. To reduce waiting times for online and in-person participants, our practice is to advance such items on our meeting agenda if we are notified. Commentators will need to provide name, agency if relevant, and place of residence or business. The first item on the agenda would be the meeting minutes, which Stephanie distributed to all with a last-minute tweak from Susan. They have all been distributed, and so everyone is familiar with them.
It was just a clarification for that.
Right. And I will move their acceptance. Is there a second? Seconded by Martha. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. The first item on our agenda, under demolition permit applications, is for 4 Bay Lane Watermill, a proposed demolition of the structure. And I prepared a report which I forwarded to all of you, and it was uploaded to the portal. And just briefly, this is a converted barn, built probably in the neighborhood of 1902, maybe a year or two later, because of its association with the house next door that was constructed in 1902. It was constructed for William G. Conklin, who was a banker in New York, had a career of working his way up from bank clerk to bank president over 47 or 48 years of his life in New York City for the Franklin Savings Bank, which was a bank which lasted till about into the late 1980s or so, when it merged into the American Savings Bank. And it had a magnificent building on the corner of 8th Avenue and 42nd Street in Manhattan, which would have been a very worthy landmark, but before it got noticed, it was demolished in the 1970s. Conklin, how he came to have the wherewithal to purchase. It's a bit of an unknown. In this little map here, you see the name Arthur Jones, who we know previously because his house was landmarked on New Light Lane by the owners about 2 years ago. William Conklin was buried under the name William Conkling in the Bronx with his wife and other members of his family. Arthur Jones was Arthur Conkling Jones. So some kind of nephew or cousin of sorts, maybe a generation removed, was also involved in this neighborhood. This house was looked at by AKRF in 2014 for its historic character. They observed it couldn't be viewed clearly to evaluate its architectural historic significance, but they guessed it was a barn converted to residential use. And they noted that it had skylights and other modifications that caused them to demur from listing it as a historic resource for the town of Southampton at that time, suggesting that maybe future research might provide some other evaluation. The article that I found in the Seaside Times, Conklin had the house built. He had bought the property about 3 or 4 months before from the a Ludlow family member, senior. That Ludlows were original settlers of the Mecox area in the late 1600s, and held that land for a long period of time. And the builder was Ellsworth Downs, who was a known builder in the Southampton, in the Bridgehampton and Mecox area. Conkling eventually sold the house to William Van Cleef, who was a businessman in Staten Island, old Dutch family stock. William Van Cleef was a lumber dealer for a while in a firm founded by his grandfather in New York City. And he bought the property in 1921, kept it until about 1947 or so, 48. He spent a lot of time in that place. He was eventually had moved in the late 1930s and 40s to open an orange grove in Florida, and he became a broker dealer and packager of citrus in Florida, and would, when it got hot, come north because that's not the citrus season, where he would have to work and pay attention. The house was then sold to Douglas Brader, who was a writer and an artist. The property, the whole property, that was intact, and it was Brader who began selling off pieces of it to different people. 4 Bay Lane, which you see here next to 24, was basically went through the hands from Brader to George Sakir, who was a designer and an inventor and an artist, who became very wealthy and lived in that house with his wife for a number of years, and then relocated to Paris, where he died about 1988 or so, at the age of about 90. His work is in the Museum of Modern Art. of museums. His primary fame is as a designer of glass for a glass company, but he also designed other things, including a famous mousetrap that was a better mousetrap, but nobody beat the path to its door. The newspapers made great fun of that piece of his invention when it first appeared. Secure sold it to the Lochheim family. The Lochheims were publishers of the Southampton Press out here. The Lochheims then sold it to Gwen Verdon, the Broadway actress, where she held it for probably about 10 years or so. So there is an ownership chain involving prominent people of one fashion or another for the house. As you can see, the house has lost its barn characteristics. If I can, let me try to bring up, if I can, the photographs of the barn that was taken. Yeah. Just run through them. This is the a realty photograph that was generated when the house was on the market. Susan and I went on the 31st of August, courtesy of John Bennett's, contacting the owners to allow us to come by and photograph its characteristics. But obviously there has been quite a change in fenestration and appearance from a barn. The house has almost a complete look-through from the westerly face to the easterly face.
The gable windows may be original, those are the only the brown ones up there, the divided spoke ones, possibly.
What's that?
The gable window may be, none of the other windows, at least from outside, appeared to be original.
Right, and I would not expect that window to be original
And
as
it
a
may
barn
not.
window.
Most barns didn't have those, but
Yeah.
it looks older than,
Yeah.
older than some of the others.
So there are the skylights that were installed for second floor. This is the easterly facade of the house as well. There have been small, obvious additions to the footprint over the years. It looks out on Calf Creek. That is looking west to Calf Creek. There is another cottage, one-story cottage behind these trees here, which is not part of the application of an interest at this point. And the little cupola may be original. I don't know. This is kind of an overall perspective. This is the original house, now called 24 Bay Lane. This is 4 Bay Lane here. This property was 11 acres in size and has basically been divided into 4 parcels, which has a very deep driveway access to it and obscured by landscaping, so it lacks any kind of familiar appearance. I will say that, going back to my youth when I worked on the farm next door, and there was no landscaping. I mean, you could see the buildings and so on, but the years have removed any familiarity from any person involved. So I had those recommendations in the report, which was basically that the findings of AKRF, there's been a loss of the agrarian setting for the original barn structure. The structure is a separated parcel from its related original building. The structure's been converted to use for residential purpose. There's been multiple renovations of the residential character of the property, and there's no public awareness of that ownership of that building in terms of the notable people that I kind of mentioned. And the opinion of, I found that the opinion of AKRF in 2014 was basically sound. And with that, I recommend we not have any objection to the demolition application, with just a suggestion that if there is significant amounts of older wood that might come from flooring or structural beams that might still be in place, that local contractors who specialize in historic restoration might be solicited for any interest in such wood as a part of this response. So I'm going to offer you, comments or any reactions, or?
I mean, I agree with you with no objection. I defer to exactly what you said, but I guess if I had a preference is if they could have incorporated the old building into the new construction, so it's not a total loss. That would be my preference, but I will defer, to just the salvage of the materials, but
Right.
if it could be incorporated, that would be a wonderful thing, just because there is a link to that larger house next door.
Yeah, the other aspect of this property is a long, narrow
Oh, yeah,
parcel that
I realize
presents,
that,
presents other
may,
challenges there too.
may
so,
not,
Yeah,
will not likely happen, but if, that could have been a preference, but I defer exactly, particularly A, you wrote the report, and B, you are familiar with it for years, I mean, that whole area, so I defer to what you said.
any other comments? And so response, I'll file a response of no objection, and just with the suggestion that perhaps an attempt be made to salvage what might be old wood components of the structure when it's demolished. All right, good. Anything for?
It's John Bennett for the applicant. Thank you. Obviously, we would appreciate the conclusion that there'd be no objection. So what I'll do is, I had my copies of my 1917 Belcher hide that I bought from the former village historian Bob Keane and all that stuff, but I know better.
You should identify yourself.
I'm John Bennett for the applicant. My apologies, you're absolutely right. But I know better than to say something, God forbid I snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. So I will sit down. Thank you very much for your very studied analysis, Mr. Wisnowski. I appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
And thanks for the help in
Thank you.
getting everything looked at.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Of course.
Are you gonna build, presumably, you're gonna build?
Well, first of all, we love the older aspects of the house. We're probably gonna reincorporate it into something, but we're gonna build something like a barn
Lovely.
type
A
of
barn
house.
feel,
Yeah.
for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, now we can
Yeah, but it doesn't feel,
do that.
doesn't feel like a townhouse.
The next is demolition application for 22 Bishop Avenue, and Bill and Stephanie both took a look at this.
Yes.
And would you kind of give the brief on it, please?
Okay, so this is the demolition of a 1900 dwelling. There's a 1990 pool and a shed that we don't know the date of on the property as well, but they're not part of this application. I believe that they're both going to stay. The house has an AYB of 1920, which is more likely 1900. There was a large addition done to the front of the house. The open front porch was enclosed, a smaller front porch was added onto the front of it, and a very small dormer, probably similar to the one on the rear of the house, was replaced by this much larger dormer on the front. So there's very little left of the original look of the front of the house. It's in good condition. The back of it is very much a little craftsman-style cottage. It has the jerkin head detail, open rafter tails, little brackets that support the rake details, all of the craftsman details that are very typical. Inside is open floor joists, typical sort of short walls in the entry with tapered columns on them, again, all craftsman-style details. There are two little benches on the front porch. There's these odd little brackets, and you can see where the front ones were previously cut off. So I guess at some point they were trying to get away from the craftsman style, added these brackets to the porch that they put on, and they're also a little further down the sides. Added these little front porch benches. They all look very traditional, but they definitely weren't part of the original house. Okay, so this property shows up on the 1916 map as owned by Mary E. Rayner, which is probably Mary Elizabeth Rayner. Shows up at the 1933 Fire District map as owned by a William A. King. The property is not listed in the historic profiles of Eastport, Spionk, Remsenburg, and West Hampton. It is also not listed on the 2014 Historic Resources Survey, that AKRF. The property does not appear to, with the changes done to the front of it, meet any of the criteria for consideration as landmarked under the town code. It was difficult to tell on the rear of the house. There's a small bump out. It has all the same details as the remainder of the house. There you go. It's hard to tell whether that was an addition or not. It's a little smaller in scale, kind of ties into the dormer on the second floor, which was probably the same as the dormer on the front of the house before the larger addition. So it was hard to tell whether this little bump was a later addition. The foundation didn't show enough for us to tell whether it had been added on or just originally a part of it. The side of the house, the chimney is pulling away from the house, so they've used an iron band to try and strap it to the house, stop it from moving further. The side of the house also goes down a little bit. Here you can see where they closed up a couple of foundation windows in order to build a terrace in this part of the house, which has already been removed. The side of the house steps down, so there's actually a one-car garage accessible from the side of the house from a driveway that's sunken. So because of the changes to the front of the house, I didn't see any reason to object to the demolition of it. That's really the only portion of it. Even though it's sort of on a corner lot, the corner is very wooded, so you can really only see it from the west side from the street. Although the back is still very historic looking, it's not visible from the street, and the front of the house is so different than it originally was. I didn't really have an objection to demolishing it for landmarks reasons, but it was in good condition, and again, it's difficult just to throw a viable house in the dumpster without using it in some way. So similar to the previous application, I felt if there was anything that could be donated. They've already removed some of the interior hardware, cast iron radiators, things like that. If there's anything that could be used or repurposed somewhere, I would suggest that that opportunity be given.
So, any comments and concerns?
It's hard to object when these people are tearing down a beautiful house.
Yes.
The build-ins are really, of course, we don't do interior, but
Right.
really interesting and,
Yeah, but the interior is also, you know, having gone through the house with Bill, it would be very difficult to actually live in. The closets are extremely small. There's a little bit of storage under the eaves, but not much. There've been prior renovations in the interior that have not been done really all that well. The kitchen is a disaster area. Yeah, I mean, there's certain aspects of the interior that are interesting and look to be original, but there's a lot of it that just would require a major amount of rejiggering for, you know, a modern family to live in comfortably. And I understand these folks have, I think it was a couple of kids, and
Yes.
it's a family. I can understand needing more room. What's proposed here is apparently a traditional house that's gonna be a little bit bigger, but not hugely bigger, as we understand it.
And we didn't get the drawings for the proposed house, so
No.
can't make any sort of a comment on whether it's a traditional or modern and fits in with the neighborhood or not.
Yeah, although we did talk to the builder. He was the one who took us through.
But typical 1900s house, the rooms are small, and
Mm-hmm.
second floor, some of the ceilings are coming down lower. So,
Would you do the honors?
yes.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda is a demolition application for 24 Edgemere Drive, North Sea. And
I did go by there this evening before the meeting. Sorry, I just didn't get time for that. I mean, and it's hard to find it because there was only a faded, painted number on a faded old piece of wood, and I'm like, is that 24? Looks like it. I remember.
yeah,
The
this
pictures.
is the house
Yeah.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And
It-
I went there today to just take a picture of the house. Let's see. It was there, it says it's an AYB 1929 on the assessor's record. And I found the house on a 1930 aerial, outlined in the yellow there. And let's see, affidavits. So this is a house boarded up,
Well, the
Yeah.
front porch was boarded up. The windows,
pardon?
only the front porch was boarded up. The rest of
Yeah,
it
front,
was.
yeah, front porch, yeah. It's stucco clad.
Right, and then asbestos shingles on the second floor. I went by right before the
Yeah.
meeting. There's one window that I believe is original, because if you look on the other side of that porch, one of the boards was pulled away, and you can see in, and there's like a craftsman style, you know, the four squares in the corners type window, but the rest of them are all 1/1s.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
The ones shown in the photographs here are all 1/1s.
The fireplace was interesting. I mean, it was like one of these Adirondack-y type of stone fireplaces.
Let's see if I
It
get
looks like
the
there's some original
application here.
doors in the house here, paneled doors.
I was looking at the front door, and stylistically, it could be original, but it looked in too good a shape compared to the rest of the house.
Yeah. I'm not seeing a lot of
I think it was, you know, like
historic
somebody's
integrity.
beach
A
cottage.
beachy cottage, yeah. Summer bungalow.
it almost looked like there are 3 volumes.
Yeah, like there was adding and adding and,
And adding,
Right, the,
closing a porch.
Yeah, you can see the door and then the crest.
yeah, there's
grill
that
on the
window, yeah, that's the window, yeah.
Right there, yeah. so I don't,
Windows proportionally are weird too, they're very long and not that wide.
yeah, the rest is just, plans,
Shows
there.
the
So I didn't see
Too big.
anything
house that's
Oh.
going in, it's,
merit in the,
Yeah, they're filling the space.
well, everything around it is doing the same thing.
It wasn't an AKRF.
so,
Big hard to.
no objection to its demolition. I will tell you that the road, what they call Edgemere, is basically the narrowest of streets.
I know, when I got to the end, I was like, this is a road?
Yes.
And there was no street sign, so you couldn't tell it was a, but then somebody's house said 30 Edgemere.
Yeah, and I actually, there was another road up before it,
Kendall's
running
Lane?
off, and I went down that one thinking
Kendall's?
that was Edgemere, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, there are, the neighborhood is being reconstituted with new houses.
Yeah.
This is probably, one
I
of the
live about
oldest houses there.
3 blocks away.
Yeah, so, okay, so no objection, and I'll file the paperwork on it then too. Okay, 498 North Main Street.
I did go by there too,
Okay, maybe you can,
but I don't have much to say, cause I couldn't even get in the driveway, because.
because there was a landscaping truck
Yes.
parked in front of it, yes.
You were
I-
following each
I-
other too.
Yeah, I guess.
You could hardly get between the hedge and
Yeah,
the truck was as wide as
the
the hedge
opening.
opening, that was there, so.
The house is not very visible from North Main Street. That's one thing. There's a hedge in the front.
Just to put it in perspective here.
And it's anyone's guess, but when I was trying to go through, the GIS, because it said there was a relocation, but it wasn't the 1920 house, so they relocated a garage, I guess, with an apartment in it. So, looking at that, as far as I can tell, looking at the older surveys, the older portions are to the south. The original house would be the farthest to the south, and it looks like they may have moved that garage and attached it. And the newer addition that has that round window, that gable width, that's a new section, as far as I can tell, as
The
of
house has been modified a lot.
2005, so what you see, that's the larger two-story, I think is the newer section.
Let me just see if I can.
I couldn't tell by looking at it. I had to go through and try to look at the old surveys and the old maps, because I could not, I didn't stop, but I just
Yeah.
drove by it. And
Yeah.
I would have assumed the one on the
Yeah,
left
I think you're
was the
right.
older section, but it is the newer one.
Right, right.
The
And so the
two-story.
one on the right would be where they're gonna put the addition.
That's where the addition is going, right?
That's the oldest section, and I think the center section might have been the garage that they relocated there.
I never looked at this house before.
That's my guess, because the configuration kept changing. And the last one actually had the right section and the center section, and they said there was a two-story addition being put on the left, and there was a small one-story addition being put on the very far right that you can't see.
Well, all the additions that are proposed are 1-story.
It
Well,
appears to be
it's
on the,
basically a
on the
kitchen.
front, on the far
The-
right.
the-
A
But I'm
kitchen
just
and a new
saying-
entrance, yeah.
I would have guessed that the left section was the older one, but it's not.
It doesn't look it.
Yeah,
The Assessor
Given-
AYB is 1920 on the house.
Right.
and that
Uh,
right section looks more like a 1920, like bungalow or something.
Right, versus, right, a farmhouse type
Right.
thing, so that's,
It's, its origins are obscure. There was on the 1916 map a farmhouse and building for J. Ellison,
Yeah.
located in approximately that area, but it's not clear whether they'd be connected or not.
I couldn't tell if it was farther north or not,
Yeah.
right?
So, the kitchen extension that's gonna be kind of bumped out is on the right here, that comes forward. And then there's gonna be a second story,
Oh, yeah, there
addition,
is a second story, oh,
on
sorry.
the top, as well. I don't have any kind of concern about it, myself, so.
They also submitted the later submitted plans for a new garage. But I couldn't see on the site plan where that it would go, but I don't think that's necessarily relevant since it's new construction, and this is not a landmarked property, so. But I couldn't see where that was.
Well,
I did see second floor someplace, but
they
I,
did have a plan for the garage, I know,
Yeah, but it didn't.
yeah,
on
it
the
came
survey.
in the second.
right, but where it's to be located is not,
I kept thinking maybe it was attached, but it's of course not,
Yeah.
and
no.
Survey didn't show it?
didn't see it in the site plan.
So,
Proposed site plan?
no concerns here for a building that appears to have been
I
modified.
guess my
pre-
point was, is if you have to go back into the records to determine which section is the older of the
Then it doesn't meet any
sections,
of the
if it's
criteria.
going to be altered again, several, with a new garage or front, I have no concern,
Yeah, okay.
or no objection, I guess.
Anybody else?
45A Shinnecock Road, Hampton Bays.
Road, and it's a big hedge.
That was, okay, that's
Big
a
hedge.
1925 building that,
The back is here first.
I found on the,
Hedges in the thing. I mean, existing,
I found on the, 1930 aerial. This is the parcel here that you see in kind of a flag lot, behind, a house that might have been earlier in character. Spread out. And it's for, a renovation. I have no, I didn't get a chance to go by and try to take any picture, of the property.
It said one-story front addition, 174 square feet. And someplace else, I saw a second floor addition, but
Rambling.
that wasn't in the application. I think that was in GIS. And it's been altered in 2004, 2010, 2011. I mean, I won't specify exactly what alterations were done, but a variety of, I think 2004, deck was 2010, reno 2010 and 2011.
It looks like it has been
I couldn't figure out what that was.
remodeled several times,
Yeah.
and, I don't think, I find any problems with, any plans they have for it.
And it's on a flag lot, so I
Yeah,
assume it
it's
would be
obscured
visible.
from the street, as well, yeah. There are some probably older homes along along Shinnecock Road that, you know, are worthy of attention, but this is not one of them. Okay, so, without any concern, I'll respond with no objection to that. 80 Old Canoe Place Road, Tim provided an alert to the fact that it did not seem to deserve full review. The reason was, do you remember?
I think it had been significantly altered and the scope of the work wasn't large enough.
Wasn't significant
Yeah.
in character, yeah.
I think they were repairing
A
from
lot-
flood damage, maybe.
A lot of it was interior renovation for
Yeah.
flood damage.
Yeah.
Mostly interior work, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
and for 30 Olden Lane, Puyog, interior renovations to repair water damage for an older house that was identified as a historic resource in the AKRF report, but basically repair and not something of remodeling
No,
on gross.
no, if this one ever comes before us though for remodeling, this is definitely one we'd wanna do a report on. There's a fabulous history with this house. It's very, very interesting historic, nature, so.
Do you wanna tell them that, just in case?
No, I think they
Should we-
probably know, cause it's the same family.
20 Apple Road, North Sea.
Selma Carter.
Proposed addition, kind of a wraparound addition. Let me get rid of these here.
I've seen that house for years, going down Major's Path, and I had no idea that it was an old house.
I,
28 Apple Road.
drove by it just from the road, and it appeared to be like the pictures, except, it hadn't been, there's no upkeep, just at
Right.
least maybe during the summer.
Yeah. So this is
It's an old house.
one-story house that's
Bad. Cottage.
located just off Major's Path, and fairly undistinguished in my opinion.
It's gonna get even worse.
This is the overhead. The plans they have are to add in the rear and on the side as additions. And I think I have that next in the, yeah, there it is in the,
And I looked very quickly and saw there were additions done in 1990, 1996, and 1996, and a deck added in 2007, so there were alterations for this alteration coming up. Not AKRF.
yeah, this was, the assessors AYB is 1940 on it.
Yeah.
So it's, in that margin, when it wouldn't actually come before us perhaps, otherwise. But any problems with, saying that there's no, okay, no concerns. 2415 Montauk Highway, Bridgehampton, was an application for proposed interior renovations for a rear structure that had been erected in the 1990s and connected to a historic storefront on Main Street, Bridgehampton, with a much earlier, probably circa 1900 origin. And after the submission of a better description of the work and what was going on, basically it was raising an interior ceiling without raising the roof. So that appears to be totally consonant with the prospective look of Bridgehampton's Main Street. So Stephanie and I determined that it was not, review was not needed.
But this is in the landmarking district.
Pardon?
This is in your landmarking, in our landmarking, this would be on the main street.
Yeah,
So
this
does
would be in
that
the
matter?
historic
in
district,
which-
yes.
Yeah.
But there's no exterior changes proposed.
Which one is this?
It's the Cochrane building, where Cochrane Estate Agents is, or
Um,
Myth
I think
Seekers?
it's-
Corcoran?
It's considered Sanford Plumbing Building, but it's Connor Building now.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one?
Yeah, it's this side.
North side, right?
Yeah, it's, actually, no, it's the south side of Montauk Highway. The historic building fronts on Main Street, and then there's been an addition on the back. There's like a courtyard in front of it,
Right.
but this is all, it's all a newer building. And
Alright.
there's no exterior changes proposed at all.
Okay.
This is the building that's set back from
The white building.
Main Street. And Hampton's Yoga, are you familiar with Hampton's Yoga?
I have to say, I have been,
Okay.
very smelly hot yoga.
So, but I think the second floor is office space, and they were just making more of a elevated roof for a conference room and offices upstairs. But anyway, it went very well. So, certificate of appropriateness discussions, we have none. Referrals, none. 11 Walnut is probably still percolating in the background, waiting for the conditions for an easement possibly to be made. 76 Main Street, West Hampton Beach is on the agenda for a public hearing on October 10th before the town board. I think probably an evening meeting, Tuesday, October 10th.
That's the first Tuesday's afternoon.
The first Tuesday, October 10th would be the second Tuesday.
I don't think so, that sounds like the first Tuesday, right?
It's the second Tuesday of the month.
Oh, the second, right, the second Tuesday of the month is afternoon, the night.
It's later in the month.
Okay.
Is night.
So, but anyway, that's up for public hearing and seems to be in process. All the town board members signed on to the sponsorship of the resolution for the public hearing. So I think that enthusiasm bodes well for the outcome. Okay, 149 South Country Road, that's in the same status of waiting for,
Waiting for an easement
Uh,
offer, which CPF is aware of and is figuring out what the status is with the appraisal, so it's in the works.
all right. Bridgehampton Historic District, the resolution for public hearing, has it been put in Minitrack yet? Or, Kelly Doyle, from the town attorney's office, was working on, and there was a little bit of time was being taken to try to dot the i's and cross the t's on both the list of properties and the wording of for the public hearing, but I think everything was in place, and I think she suggested that maybe there would be a public hearing on October 24th.
That's what I have in my calendar.
What?
I have it in my calendar
For the 24th? Okay, all right.
And
so-
it'll be at the community house? Or here, it'll be here?
So that's well on its way as well. Some other other concerns, let me just raise an issue with our liaison here concerning tree clearing properties. I noticed the planning board was excessively agitated this last week or this week over clearance of sites, excessive clearance of sites, and the question of re-landscaping associated with it. But they were trying to find a voice to express their concern about the applicants or the plans that come before them that are already kind of damaged goods with respect to the amount of clearing that's taken place with them. The concern that I had was that I've noticed a number of times historic structures, particularly in Bridgehampton, where it was easy to notice them, had mature trees lopped off even before an application for demolition of the buildings was forwarded. That, and in some cases, the question is whether some very magnificent trees that were lost in that process, whether that kind of thing might be addressed. We had conversations once before about this a little bit.
Yeah, there had been discussions about amending the code to put limitations on clearing outside of the aquifer overlay district. Right now, the only restrictions are in the aquifer overlay. If you're outside of the deep water recharge areas in the aquifer, you can cut down anything you want. But there had been talk about requiring, not allowing any vegetation clearing prior to getting a site plan approval. But that would mean that the planning board would have to add vegetation as a site plan element for something that they could require to be preserved.
Well, it was suggested from their meeting, listening to the meeting, that they were going to take up this whole, or try to promote this whole issue for higher level review, potentially by the town board even. But they're citing their particular concern as just one aspect of the clearing of property, which might affect the historic look of trying to preserve certain buildings and
Right.
structures, So, I don't know if you want to try to just make a note to see if this discussion comes up and,
Well, that's something that can be addressed too in the historic district.
well, it does become a problem even in historic districts, even with planting new landscaping. Things may need some clarification along that line.
Okay. We'll discuss it.
Some of the other concerns is nothing with respect to annual landmark inspections, except I would ask whether or not this thing should be kept on our agenda. In theory, the enforcement of the code belongs to code enforcement with respect to any changes, unauthorized changes in landmarks. The problem that I see trying to have this taken on a voluntary basis by individuals on the landmarks board is one, different standards, the need to keep records need to be filed, those kinds of things are more of a load that would, I think, make people, there's no expense, there's no way to budget for that kind of thing so I don't see that as a practical issue to be solved at this point in time, that it really, the town has to step up much more to provide the kind of approaches and support for things like code enforcement. There are plenty of other things, there are probably other important priorities for code enforcement that need to be addressed first. Excuse me, before the question of changes to landmarks. And, you know, I don't think that we'd have an approach at the moment that we can work with here.
Is this just to make sure, is this to make sure people have done what they've actually put in front of us to do? Or in general, things that haven't quite come in front of our board? What's the point of it?
I think what happened is a couple years ago, I said, gee, maybe we should take pictures, and then Ed pointed out it was more complicated than just.
Take pictures of
So
what?
it, I would say, that's how it got on there, and Ed had addressed it, saying this, and I can see your point, you know, that it was more complicated than us just taking an annual picture, because then there's enforcement. And then if you get into the historic district, you're not just talking 30, you're talking, you know, so it.
We're talking lots and lots.
Yes,
So,
it's a
right.
big job.
So and that was a point well taken. I just thought, oh, well, gee, I could snap the watermill once, if we each snapped our area once a year, but
Yeah,
it was more complicated for the reasons you just said, is keeping then it needs to be recorded someplace, then it needs to be followed up on, and then it's not as simple as just snapping a picture.
my sense, and it's a vague sense, is that changes to buildings in historic districts become very noticeable to the members of the community, who generally are the ones that raise any kind of alarm bell over something that's going wrong. And that probably is the mechanism that we probably have to think about relying on at this stage of the game. That people who are where they live in a historic, or they are moving about in a historic district, that something gets changed, it gets noticed, and they begin to question if it's something that bothers them, and that's the way it comes to public notice. So if we can leave that that
I will-
way, and,
I will remove it from the agenda.
okay, thanks.
And I'm okay with that, so that's.
Town-owned cemeteries, I have no research or information to provide on that. There are all these little pieces that are involved. The historic district definition for Bridgehampton includes the, quote, old cemetery. Since it's not taxed, nobody is very much concerned about it. But it's apparently in the name, the mail for it goes to the Presbyterian church next door. But the Presbyterian church doesn't own the cemetery. And talking to some people in Bridgehampton, the cemetery gets taken care of. Somebody mows the grass, but nobody knows who's responsible for paying it or ordering it done. There is the cemetery is called the Old Cemetery. There is the Edgewood Cemetery, which is the new Bridgehampton Cemetery, newer. And that has a corporate structure. The Old Cemetery apparently has an association that's not been noticed, and nobody can find a mailing address for it. And so the question is, where the cemetery will wind up one day, whether it'll become another town-owned cemetery or not. But we'll keep looking at that down the Stony Brook, Southampton Historic Buildings, there's probably nothing to report there. The, this- the question of whether or not the Stony Brook Council will take up the question is something that'll probably be occurring in October sometime, so we'll see if that brings any attention to the campus in any way. I should say, certified local government activity, there's nothing at the moment that I know of that we're connected to. Vicky, who kind of has overseen that, she did call, or she did email me earlier today saying that she's still recovering from her operation and that she would not be here tonight, so I just want to note her absence and the fact that she gave us notice about it for the record. Anything from my colleagues here? Susan?
Couple quick things. One thing Jeff mentioned, it might be time to update the contact list with the email addresses since his has changed. So I'll send that out where everybody can say my information's correct or change it. So I'll do that before the next meeting. And also with the historic resource map and website, I'm down to just needing a couple blurbs and to submit what we have. And Stephanie, I will say, with the West Hampton Beach PAC, if that actually gets passed on the 10th,
Okay.
and I hate to ask, to put something else on your plate, but if we could get a blurb for that, I'll probably just submit it, because if you, once something misses the cutoff, then it
It's strange
gets
forever.
put on the back burner, so I think
When do you want it by?
when I say the 10th, but sometime in October.
Sometime in October will be
So,
feasible.
it's, but we'll get it together, because that way, once we have that one, and it can be short in a couple of
Yeah.
photos, whatever.
It's easy, that one's easy.
So, there might be some cut and paste things from their history that might speak.
Yep.
But I appreciate you doing that, when I say October, that way, we won't have to resubmit just for that one.
Yep.
So, that's all I have.
And I owe you a blurb on the Dick's windmill,
Yep, I'll send a reminder.
but I have no pictures of the windmill.
Well, I'm thinking
Well, we
just,
don't have it, the pictures in situ will look like the marshmallows in the field.
Is it just, okay,
Yeah, it's still like that. We
So the
have
question is
historic
whether-
pictures.
whether a sketch would do or not?
I'm thinking one of those renderings would be.
Yes,
Yeah.
the rendering would be probably good for now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we could always replace it, okay, I'll do the blurb and I'll see if I can round up a sketch from the materials that were sent to us by the
Some
Village
very
of West
nice
Hampton
renderings.
Beach. And there was also just another little item, there is a series of barns in Watermill of an old dairy farm, once called the Suffolk Dairy Farm.
Is that Pearson Court?
Yeah,
This is in the Cobb area
Yeah,
of,
the street is Pearson Court.
they call it Pearson Court right there.
yeah,
It's off Cobb Road.
that's Cobb Road,
Yeah.
yeah. And this, the owner of these barns lives in Connecticut. Her family used to farm this land. The family was a family of Carlton Halsey, and in the process of timing out of agriculture, Carlton Halsey is now died about 6 or 7 years ago, but his daughter owns the barns. And she had approached me for information about how they got constructed and what the history of their, they were before her father got involved in 1947 or so. And the barns date back to 1910 or 1911. The parcel that isolates the barns from Cobb Road has an easement on it, given to the Peconic Land Trust. And the easement is I believe, is a visual easement, that nothing would be put on that parcel that would obstruct the view of the dairy barns. So that's my understanding of it. May be incorrect, but
There is a rock there with a plaque on it to that,
yeah.
saying
So-
there was an easement.
Yeah. So in any case, the owner of the barns, she lives in Connecticut, but she is going to pay a visit. Theory, she was going to be here this week and asked if I and somebody else would, Adam Halsey, who is a different Halsey in Watermill, would like to see the barns. And I said, yes, of course. So, but it's possible I would ask Susan, since she's such a barn denizen and such a great photographer of buildings, that possibly when she calls next week, that she emailed me she would come next week instead of this week, that, you know, we might get a chance to get you in to
See that? It seems to be farther out there. It almost looks like an old water tower right about
Yeah.
where your arrow is, up,
Right.
right down, right at that, right down.
That one building that's to the
That
left.
one building that's sort of
In
in
the
the green,
northwest of the parcel.
right behind the barn where the green is. Keep going back.
yeah,
Right
this
there,
is
there.
this is a water tower.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
if I did just to see if I can get that information here. Or maybe it's in the I've forgotten where I filed it. Maybe it's, here it is, okay.
There it is,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
so these are the
There it is.
barns,
Wow.
1915 or so probably. This is the water tower in the back there.
Yeah.
So that, very dramatic piece of agricultural history there. I went into the history of the barns and the history, a little bit of the dairy industry in this part of Southampton town there. But it was the Suffolk Dairy. So the person who partnered with the local farmer, Pearson, was a Brooklyn furrier and a sportsman of sorts as well. This is him in Brooklyn with one of his horses. But after starting the dairy, he got killed in an automobile accident about 5 years later, and so the dairy lost a lot of its oomph and went out of business 1920 or so. No.
So
But anyway,
his
that's
name on
just
one of the maps, but I didn't know who he was closer up to Cobb, farther up, a little farther north on Cobb Road. Looked like he had a parcel and possibly a house
Oh.
there.
Yeah, this is, you're very familiar with Cobb because on the Bennetts and all the
Yeah.
estate houses that were along Mecox Bay there.
There he is.
Yeah, directly across, so. Anyway, that's just a little tidbit, nothing more for, I think for us to consider. If there's nothing from you,
I had one matter that I had emailed you about. Bill and I apparently have a number of landmarking applications that we'll be working with for the next few months based on some of the email conversations we've had. And we've had talks with a number of people, and one of the questions that always comes up is the historic preservation easement. And how much easement money might I possibly get? And the only thing we have to go by right now are some of the easement values that have been, previously awarded to homes. We're working with a couple of people right now, one of who just got an easement offer that he was disappointed in, and another person who is trying to self-calculate what his easement value might be. He's waiting on an offer. So. The whole business of how these easements are calculated, the value of them is a mystery to us. So we were thinking it might be not a bad idea to invite the CPF director, Jackie Fenlon, here to talk to us about how an easement offer is developed. The appraisal process, and then what happens between the appraisal and the actual easement offer, what goes into that. So I think it would be certainly instructive and help us have better informed conversations with people who are interested in landmarking and getting a historic facade easement. So I don't know if that could be perhaps arranged for one of our future meetings, perhaps one without a lot of applications on the agenda, but
well, if that's agreeable to everybody, I will see if I can get an acceptance to an invitation to have a discussion with CPF at some meeting that's convenient to the schedules of everybody. Okay, we'll do that. And anything else? My goodness.
Yeah, I know, this is a record.
Very good. Well, without further business before the board, this meeting is now adjourned at 8:14 p.m. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.